of the podcast Redneck Gone Green. My name is Robert Robinson. I'm filling in for the regular host, Shane Knight and David Cobb, who are both outside of the country. And I was graciously asked if I would step in, and I don't mind doing it since I know both of the individuals well. So just a little bit about me before I turn it over to my guests for today. My name is Rob Robinson. As I said, I'm a professor of urbanism at the New School University in New York. I also am a special advisor to a human rights organization in New York called Partners for Dignity and Rights, formerly called NESRI, which was an acronym for the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative. It is a pleasure to be here to talk about economics and other factors in this country which make life difficult for many of us. So I hope that you enjoy the conversation that we had. We want to make it a free-flowing conversation rather than talking at you. So with that, I'm going to bring in my guest speaker today is Johanna. So Johanna, if you could graciously introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you stepping in last minute. I know we had another host scheduled to host this, so I appreciate your flexibility, and I appreciate the guests today rolling with us as we're doing this live. So join us, it'll be fun. My name is Johanna Epke. I am the founder of Build and Fight, a new 501c4 coming out of a long tradition of work that we will get into. I am a lawyer by training. I have practiced movement lawyering for about 15 years. And I first met David Cobb in 2005. My first job out of college was with the Green Party national headquarters in DC, and he was just coming off of his presidential run. And so we have a long history, and I'm delighted to be working with him as of recently. And I'm happy to share some of the work we've been up to. So thanks for having this conversation with me, Rob. Thank
you, Johanna. So let's start with a conference I was fortunate enough to attend earlier this month in Atlanta called Resist and Build. If you could just give us a synopsis of what that conference was about and what you wanted the public to walk away with after spending 3-4 days with you guys.
Sure. So Resist and Build is not an annual summit, but a periodic gathering of the Solidarity Economy Network, folks doing solidarity economy work all over the country, and indeed folks as part of the international conversation as well. It was a 4-day gathering. There were some public sessions. On Sunday, there was a carnival against capitalism. We had some fun. We danced, we sang, we did face painting. We had some great barbecue. It was really fun. There were a lot of public sessions. There were a lot of workshops and plenaries in Atlanta, know your rights trainings, storytelling, narrative conversations, a lot of really good workshops. I learned a lot from a lot of really talented people there. And the summit also included some strategy sessions with folks who have been involved in the solidarity economy conversation for quite some time on the Friday and Monday surrounding the broader conversations. And that was an attempt to have some deeper strategy conversations about what are the opportunities, risks, especially in this fraught political moment. So yeah, some long strategy sessions that are coming out of that, and some synthesis of the broader public discussion there. Some new campaigns coming out of the Resist and Build Summit as well. There's a new pledge to resist fascism that the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network has put up. That's at ussen.org/pledge. That'll be in the chat for y'all. Also, as we were there, we were responding in real time to the firebombing of the Freedom Flotilla and the launch of No More Suppressed Solidarity. There are some public statements and some activity around that as well. We were just responding in the moment to that. So some exciting developments, some relaunched conversations within the Solidarity Economy Network. We relaunched the Politics and Policy Circle. So essentially a group of folks that are interested in having that conversation about what the opportunities there are as well. So really generative, lots of great networking, relationship building, and fun.
So thank you, Johanna. I enjoyed, although I was only there for the first 3 days, I couldn't stay for the fourth. I learned quite a bit. I've been doing organizing and activism for about 17 years, and I've always believed that you can never learn too much. And I sat in a space that I don't get a chance to sit in a lot. I think the solidarity economy is something, it's a different way of looking at economics in this country. The struggle that I face, Johanna, and I'll just ask you for some quick comments on that, is I've always believed that we live in a country where we're sort of selfish. And by that, I mean, I worked hard to get what I achieved in life, Johanna. You and your family need to work hard to get yours. And I often struggle with that narrative because I believe it is something that is ingrained in a lot of us. So how do you change people's views and thinking?
That's a really good question, and something I have thought a lot about, whether this greed motivator is inherent in us or a primary driver of our decisions and actions. And I don't think that's true. I think that is more a product of our circumstance and frankly, our economic system. I think capitalism saying that people are greedy is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It forces us to think in a more self-interested way. These myths of rugged individualism and social Darwinism, this idea that we have to scramble and claw our way over each other to survive, is unfortunately part of the reality in this current system. And so people think of it as human nature because it is something that we all witness and experience, but it is not the only way. It is not the only way that people are existing now. There are people who are leaning really hard into collaborative and cooperative ways of working together, of meeting basic needs. And so I would push back on that narrative of that we are all just greedy animals trying to get over on each other. That's just not true. If you look back at human history, we would not have survived if we did not act and work cooperatively. And so I don't think that is an immutable truth about human behavior.
So thank you for that response. I'll share a quick story. I'm formerly homeless, and the 2.5 years I was on the streets of Miami and 10 months in the New York City homeless shelter. And I think that part of my life transformed me, the way I see the world, and made me think different and look for alternatives. So the solidarity economy certainly fits in my mind. And the transformation that I went through, I always wish that I had some type of magic wand that I could tap people on the head and they become transformed. I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody to have to lay on the streets of Miami through 3 hurricanes and spend 10 months in the New York City homeless shelter to become transformed. But I hope that we can move in the right direction with the solidarity economy and transform our society and push away those narratives, right? I thought you did a great job of explaining it. So thank you. I want to move into another part of the conversations. We talked about a C4. So I'm going to ask you, what is a C4? I mean, I can explain it, but you having a legal background, I'm going to leave it to the legal minds. I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. So if you could explain what a C4 is.
Sure, happy to. So we are forming a new entity called Build and Fight, which is a 501c4. I do want to distinguish really quickly before getting into what a 501c4 is, that Build and Fight is sort of a broader framework that comes out of these movement conversations. Cooperation Jackson in particular has formulated a conception of what this looks like that is foundational to our thinking. And if folks want to learn more about that, you can visit their website, cooperationjackson.org. And that is a framework that understands that we are coming to a head here. This is, late, or some folks would say end stage capitalism. And we have to contend with that reality. We have to build relationships and social networks that will allow us to both confront that reality and survive it. And so mutual aid networks, cooperative forms of property ownership, co-ops, cooperative housing and farming, community land trusts, cooperative utilities, all sorts of ways to own things differently, to manage things differently, community protection, collaborative production models, digital production. There are all sorts of really cool aspects of the broader build and fight formula. And build and fight, the 501c4 is just a small piece of that. It is an election and politically focused entity to take on that component of it. And I am happy to transition into the conversation about why C4, what a C4 is, and why that tool is helpful for us. So folks are probably familiar with a 501c3. That's a sort of more traditional nonprofit structure. And what these numbers and letters are referring to is just IRS code. So 501c is just the tax code for entities that are exempt from federal taxes. And there's a whole long list of them from 1 up until the 20s. I don't even know what the higher numbers are, but 501c1, for example, those are entities created by Congress, so federal credit unions, for example. 501c3s are your traditional nonprofit educational, what you would think of as, most nonprofits are 501c3s. And a 501c4 is similar to a 501c3, but has fewer limitations in terms of how it can engage in elections and politics. So 501c3s, in exchange for an advantage that donations to the entities are tax deductible by the donor, the C3 is somewhat shackled in terms of how much political advocacy it can engage in. C3s can do some lobbying, some engagement on ballot initiatives, but they're not allowed to really talk about candidates. They're not allowed to endorse candidates. And so there are some serious limitations, and a lot of 501c3s get scared of even brushing up against those limits, and so don't engage at all. And a 501c4, though donations to the entity are not tax deductible by the donor, there is some flexibility in return. This is sort of an artificial limitation put on 501c3s. So we're working within the confines of those structures. We want to support ballot initiatives. We want to run campaign schools. We want to be able to talk about candidates. We want to engage in elections and in politics, because that's where we know where a lot of people in the United States engage in politics. That's what they think of as politics. And so meeting them there is really the intent of forming a 501c4, to be able to engage in those conversations a little bit more directly, rather than sort of skirting around a 501c3 limitation. So not quite a PAC, but not a traditional 501c3, somewhere in the middle. Though 501c3s and 501c4s and PACs can work together, there are some creative ways that we can take advantage of all of the advocacy already out there. And I will also just say to close, a lot of folks are skeptical or critical of nonprofits as sort of part of this nonprofit industrial complex. There's a philanthropy, big donor bases, federal grants, and some strings come attached sometimes, and some nonprofits find themselves in this position where they think their growth and power and access is a good proxy for progress. And so I just want to be very clear that we're very familiar with the pitfalls of running a nonprofit, and that this is not an entity for this entity's sake, that we really want to use this productively as a tool to advance the broader build and fight formula goals.
Johanna, thank you for that explanation. I thought you were very clear, and I think what you just talked about at the end, I think I've always been skeptical of a lot of not-for-profits in the New York City area, because as you start to think about a solidarity economy, community land trusts. We have folks trying to build their own credit unions, et cetera, all these different things. All of a sudden, New York City comes with a bucket of money to support these groups. And, you know, I think one thing we all have to understand is that these not-for-profits have staff. They have to pay staff. And to do the work, you need resources. But I make the argument that we have to learn to find resources elsewhere. So I love the fact the way you explain the pitfalls, you know, how you guys might try to navigate it. I think that's so important. I think we learned a lot of lessons learned. You talked earlier about Cooperation Jackson. You know, I have a long time friendship with one of the founders of Cooperation Jackson, Kalia Kuno. And early on in the social justice world, we were all excited about what was going on down in Jackson, Mississippi, right? And we learned that we had a mayor, or we thought we had a mayor that that thought positively about our work. But then sometimes in politics, you get co-opted, right? And it makes things difficult for the groups that down there. And I think we found that out through Cooperation Jackson and Kali Akuna. So I appreciate the way you discussed that issue. And I appreciate the way they came out with the build and fight formula. They realized they ran into a brick wall, but we got to take a step back and recalibrate and move forward. So I think that's something that we don't often do in the social justice world in the US. We just keep firefighting, coming out with a fire hose in one hand and a fire extinguisher in another. And we just keep putting out these fires. But when you think strategically about how can we do this different, I think going into building a C4 is one of those options. Again, you have to watch out for the pitfalls. So with that being said, you know, with this current political climate that we lived in, polarization in the US, the Southern Poverty Law Center about a year ago released a warning to those of us in the social justice world that this administration might come after those of us doing this not-for-profit work, especially if we point people in the direction of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and if we, talk in anti-government terms. So is there any concern by build and fight around that?
Absolutely. We're cognizant of those threats. I think we are a little bit more resistant to some of the coercive tactics that the federal government will use against C3s, withholding funding primarily. So, federal grants is a way that they wield their power. Revocation of nonprofit status is certainly another one. So we're looking at different legal forms. We're forming this 501c3, but we're looking at how can we protect our assets, our partners, our digital security, make sure that we are individually protected. We're part of a broader community that is engaging in those conversations, and it is happening in real time. And so I will say, candidly, I don't have all of the answers there, but we're very aware of those risks, and we will navigate them as they come at us.
And that's fair. We don't know what all the risks are, but it is good that we have partners and collaborators in the social justice world, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, who keeps us on point about stuff like that. So I think it's also important for us to share information. So another question I might add is, any thought of different funding sources? In my time in the social justice world, I've been somewhat critical of philanthropy just for the reasons you laid out, right? And I work a lot outside of the US, and I see different structures there. But I see us sort of dependent on philanthropic organizations here in the US. Has Build and Fight given any thought of other ways to resource their work?
Yeah, so we were never under the illusion that we would get a lot of big philanthropic dollars, in large part because as a C4, a lot of those philanthropy, a lot of the foundations don't want to give to us because they don't get that tax break for it. They're not allowed to either, or their policies prevent them from doing so. And so we know that we will need to fundraise from ordinary folks, from folks that are willing to give $5, $10, $20 a month, or from those who can give a lot more. And it's going to be individuals. It's going to be regular folks that fund this work. And I think there is a lot of money out there for it. there's a few sort of dynamics that I will point to that give me optimism. One is the amount of money that individuals give to political candidates is staggering to me, right? That the presidential candidates, I don't even need to name them, but the millions of dollars, even congressional candidates, the millions of dollars that they can raise to get themselves elected. And where does that money go? It's just used for ads, right? It doesn't generate anything. They're not really doing anything with that money. And I think people are getting frustrated with that cycle. That's other than checking the box every 2 or 4 years, that is how they are being encouraged to participate in politics in this country, is to give money to candidates. But that doesn't give them power, right? That doesn't build them anything. Not to say that, one candidate might not be better than the other, but that's, if they're given a few bucks here or there, or if they have a large chunk of money to give, that's not actually going to move the needle in terms of changing the conditions in this country, actually changing how we do politics. And I think, folks that have given cycle after cycle are starting to realize that their money is not well spent there. And that's a piece that I am hopeful for. The other dynamic that I will name is there are a lot of young people that have either made a lot of money or inherited or will inherit a lot of money in coming years. There's a massive transfer of wealth upon us, and folks think differently than their parents may have. And so a lot of willingness to engage in the deeper conversation about what does that look like? Where should this money best be used?
Yeah. So for years, Johanna, I served on a philanthropic organization in New York called the North Star Fund, who basically supports organizing in underserved communities. And it's organizers like myself and people from the community that serve as program officers. And the organization was started just by what you just laid out. Young people with inherited wealth that wanted to do philanthropy different than their parents did it. And it was fantastic, and it still continues. They started in 1979 and still continues strong today. So it's a fantastic approach. And as you said, people think different. I think we're also seeing that play out a little bit here in New York City in our mayoral candidacy, where, we have several people running for mayor of New York City. Andrew Cuomo is a big leader in the polls, and he's been flooded with cash. But Zoran Mandani, who is a self-identified socialist, has raised money through dollars from everyday people, which is fantastic. And you're going to see him put that money to work. I so agree with the way you said these big dollars don't gain anything but a bunch of ads on TV. Being inundated with those ads right now, it's just ridiculous. So I want to shift gears a little bit. As I looked over the proposal of Build and Fight, I saw several directions that you wanted to take Build and Fight into. And there was a word that I call a trigger for me personally. Everybody doesn't have to think this way. A word called reform. And I'm a big believer in transforming. The word reform says to me, I want to put a Band-Aid on a crappy system so that it works better for me. No, I want to overhaul the system. I want to force that old shit out of here and build something new, right? So the name Build and Fight says to me, we should be leaning more towards a transform model versus a reform model. What say you?
I absolutely agree. So the word reform comes up in the proposal only in the context of non-reformist reforms. And this is a term of art coined by the philosopher Andre Gorz, I believe, was who came up with it in the 60s. And another phrase used to describe this dynamic is transformative reforms. So this, you're absolutely right. Reform is often contrasted as a term of art with either a revolution or a transformation. But if you think about the word, we want to reform something. The economy and the political systems in this country currently have a form. We want to reform them. We want to, give them a different form. But going back to the the understanding that most of us have come to have about the word reform, that it's, it's small tweaks. It's, messing with things at the margins to try to bring the current system into better practice. That's not where we are. Non-reformist reforms recognizes that capitalism cannot be reformed, but there are things that we can do right now, short of revolution, that will move the needle, that will escape the gravity of the status quo. There are things that folks are doing now that are reforms that, might make people's lives a little bit better, but aren't actually challenging the underlying systems and may indeed be providing support for the current system, sort of condoning the current system, working within it and validating it. And so we want to look for things that we can do that both move the needle, make people's lives better, but also make further change possible. And there's debate about where that line is. And I think some of us, doing this work will have to see. I have a belief of where that line is. Others disagree, but, we are relatively pluralistic about, what's going to work. We're not, outright critical of other approaches, but it also depends. It's not just what you do, but how you talk about it, or how you do the work, how you talk about the work. So I want to give an example of, say, structural electoral reforms. So right now, plurality voting, the idea that whoever gets the most votes in an election gets elected, even if they don't have a majority of the votes. There are folks trying to reform elections by changing it to ranked choice voting or proportional representation or some other form of voting that would help to break down the stranglehold the two parties have on our current elections. And that's a really compelling narrative. I think a lot of folks in this country would agree, ranked choice voting is a good idea. More parties would be a good idea. Even if you think parties are a bad thing for this country, it's sort of counterintuitive, but more parties might actually be helpful in sort of breaking down that two-party hegemony. And so I am supportive of these reforms, but it matters how we talk about them. So, for example, some ranked choice voting advocates will say, like, we're going to do this and we're going to win. And, if we don't win, then we just didn't do it right, or we didn't try hard enough, or something like that. And I think it's an essential component to make that a more compelling reform, a non-reformist reform, if you will, is if we talk about the forces aligned against these changes. If we talk about how this change threatens the current structure, how this change is a threat to a potential threat to the capitalist system, and say either we're going to win and get the goods, or we're going to point out, we're going to shine a light on the forces aligned against us, what their interests are, why they are so opposed to these things. And so sort of infusing that political education, doing the broader conversation about how does our current political system work, who does it benefit, and what are their tools for keeping that status quo in place is an essential component to it. So it's, I wouldn't call ranked choice voting in and of itself a transformative reform. I think it really matters how we're talking about it, how we're building those campaigns, who we're involving in them, what we're doing, So that's just sort of one example of how I'm thinking of these things.
Okay. I appreciate your perspectives on our two-party system. It goes without saying that David, as a member of the Green Party, he was against the system. I do think it'll change things here. And I look to governments in France and in Barcelona, Spain, in particular. I had some strong ties to Barcelona, Spain with the mayoral campaigns that have happened there. And I've seen a difference, right? And it can work against you also. So it's not always positive, but, France was a good example. Macron, in the recent election, his party ended up fourth based on the elections, right? So you got pushed back. You were a majority party, but the people people let their feelings be known. So I think it's an incredible way to make change. The other thing you brought up that interests me is political education. Anybody who knows me knows I stand on a mountaintop and I yell out, we need to do more political education. We need to institutionalize it. And I've been a member of Florestan Fernandes School in Brazil, a school started by the MST. And it's given me an opportunity to see how that works outside of the US, institutionalized, ongoing political education. I make the argument here that we will do political education in the moment. There's this hot issue. We need to get everybody into space and talk about it. No, we need to develop talking points and strategies on an ongoing basis, because you're not going to be able to change the system in a day, a week, a month. It's going to take time. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how we create that ongoing political education.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where I will start is identifying this tension between theory and practice, right? A lot of us are interested in the ideas, but don't really know how to put them into practice, or are interested in doing stuff, but don't really have the theoretical basis for it. And so trying to mesh those things, I think, is really important. As I mentioned earlier, we will engage a lot more people in the United States by talking about politics in the context of elections, because that's where they are expecting to have that conversation. But we need to go deeper with them. So, a lot of folks talk about the funnel. Like, we need to both expand the funnel and deepen it. And so if we're just bringing people into the conversation to engage them, but then we don't have anywhere for them to go, if we don't have a deeper political or theoretical understanding of our strategy, then we're not going to do them or the movement any good. And so making sure that we have both of those components. I am definitely a student of politics. I'm not a teacher. I am more on the practice side. I learn by doing and failing, and unfortunately I have learned by failing enough that I should learn from others' mistakes. And so I have a deep bench of folks who are helping me with that piece. As a lawyer, I'm doing the compliance work for the 501c4 and leaving the harder theoretical thinking for smarter and more experienced folks. Fortunately, you mentioned earlier Kelly Okuno. He is on the board of Build and Fight, and a wealth of information and experience and theory and former, in practice. They're doing the great work there as well. So I am drawing from those folks. It's Cooperation Jackson. They are also part of the People's Network for Land and Liberation. That's a network of folks doing this work, doing solidarity economy work on the ground all over the country. And so I am really working in service of both that practice and theory, and trying to draw from that. What that looks like functionally, how we engage folks in political education, it's part of it is coming up with curriculum, right? We need to educate folks by, doing readings together, having conversations, deep canvassing, rather than going out to get a signature to put something on the ballot and churning and burning folks as fast as possible, just to get the most number of signatures for the cheapest as possible. Really engaging folks in long conversations about the policy, about the politics, about their experience, learning from them, hearing from them, educating them, and involving them in the broader conversation. There are so many ways that we can educate each other and learn from each other, and so we'll be developing that curriculum. We'll be involving folks in those opportunities as we build this structure out.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments. I think it is important that, you're not just bringing people into a space and say, okay, we're doing political education. What is the curriculum? And, something that I want to share with you, because you were a lawyer. As I came into this work, Johanna, I was told that you can't work with lawyers or academics. And I would argue that lawyers and academics supported me in ways that the movement couldn't come close to. And it was an academic that I call a mentor. I mentioned Peter Marcuse earlier, but it was Neil Smith, a distinguished professor of geography and anthropology at the City University of New York, that stressed the very same point that you just laid out. Rob, theory and practice need to exist side by side, right? And he says, you have an obligation because you're not afraid to come into the academy and you're not afraid to go back into the community with the writings of the academy and bring people together. So I so appreciate your perspective that way. I struggle with how do we get more people to believe that, but it's something that Neil enforced upon me. And as somebody who did the work of Take Back the Land, I knew Take Back the Land's idea was to take foreclosed homes after the foreclosure crisis and turn them into community land trusts. And if a family was foreclosed and evicted from a home, we'd break in them, move the families back in there, and defend their rights to be in there using international human rights law. So it became very clear to me that I'm going to need lawyers on my side, right? So I had to poo-poo the movement and all those messages that were sent to me about academia and the legal community. So I just so much agree with you, and I appreciate your thoughts there. So I want to take the time we have left to talk about a proposal that is coming from several different angles. David has been involved with Democracy at Work and Left Forum, and we've had a lot of conversations about cooperative models and how we do this. And we just had a conversation about political education. There's a thought process that a lot of us have learned about the economy from an economics professor by the name of Richard Wolff, a mentor of mine. David Harvey has influenced a lot of my thinking. And they do a lot of talking about the value of cooperatives, but we haven't done the greatest job as a social movement of teaching people how to build them. So there's some thought about folks coming out of Resist and Build about building a curriculum on creating cooperatives. Any thoughts you want to share on that process? Does it make sense? Is this possible? Are the right people involved?
Sure. I will admit that this is not my strong suit. I'm not an economist. I come from the election and political reform world, and so I'm learning alongside a lot of folks as we go. But one thing I will say that really attracts me to the solidarity economy framework, or the perspective of the network, is that it's not just about the co-ops, right? Like building a bunch of co-ops isn't going to save us. We really need to do the political education and reform the whole system. And part of that is there are small tweaks we can make, getting into this, is this a reform or non-reformist reform? But co-ops aren't legal in every state, or the various legal structures available to these entities, to the folks that want to do this kind of work, they are limited in terms of what they are able to do. And some of the work is figuring out what are the best practices, what are the opportunities, what are the limitations, and how do we get creative about the law there within the current structure, or how do we advocate for changes to that law? And some of it's tough, lobbying for a limited worker co-op statute in various states might not go anywhere, but it's an opportunity to do some education around, well, why can't we have these things? Like, why, what are the benefits, or what are the limitations of a benefit organization? A lot of folks don't even know that that for-profit entities are limited in terms of what they're allowed to do with their money, in terms of philanthropy, benefit, to community. And so looking creatively at the different forms there. But there are some available. Co-op housing, as we mentioned, we listed some of that earlier. Community land trusts are another tool available to us now, but it's really about the broader framework that we are looking at. What does the world look like post-capitalism? We know that we need to get there. How do we get there? What are the opportunities right now? And how do we position ourselves better so that when the time comes, we can make different maneuvers?
Yeah. Johanna, I appreciate your broad perspectives. Yeah, I know you're a lawyer, but I consider you a legal activist, right? Knowledgeable. And one thing that you shared that just impresses me, I'm a big believer in education. As I said, I went through a lived experience of being homeless, and that transformed me. And I came out of that saying, I have to relearn the world all over again. And I should learn till I go to my grave, right? There's never too much education. There's never too much to know. I remember back in 2010, we were talking about community land trust. Take Back the Land was the only ones talking about it. Now it's all the buzz of the world, right? So some of these things take time for people to absorb and understand. Um, we know we need change, but it is up to us as leaders in the movement to do that political education, to bring people to a political place where they start to understand why we need change and to pull them away from a system that is pulling them in a different direction. So, Johanna Epke, I really appreciate this conversation. I learned quite a bit today. I also learned I have another lawyer in my corner if I need one. I can never have too much lawyer. I have lawyers in the Rolodex, man, all over the country. I can call on lawyers to work with me. But I think the movement needs folks like you who think creatively and just appreciate the movement lawyers that I've worked with around the world. I'll end with a little bit of a story, which I always think will bring smiles to people's faces about the legal community. So in 2009, I was a member of a group called Picture the Homeless in New York, and we took over a vacant lot on 209th Street, on 115th Street and Madison Avenue in New York. All day action. At the end of the day, 8 of us got locked up, right? At one point, the police commander came to the holding cell and asked who was Rob Robinson. So I raised my hand. And he says, between the people standing out in the lobby and the people calling up, there are 35 lawyers that say they represent you. Which one is yours? I said, all of them. He put the keys in the door and told us all to go home. So lawyers could be very beneficial to this work. Again, Johanna, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. And I look forward to future conversations, and I look forward to build and fight as we move forward.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate that. I would be remiss if I did not plug this piece in response to your last question. What is the solidarity economy and how do we build with non-reformist reforms? I looked to this piece David Cobb and Emily Kawano posted in the Nonprofit Quarterly. I'll see if we can get that link in the chat. If not, folks can look that up. Really good piece that synthesizes. It's a pretty quick read and a good synthesis of what the broad strokes of the strategy are here, what we're trying to do. And I will close, Rob, by offering, I expressed earlier, folks have skepticism about nonprofits. I think a lot of folks on the left have skepticism about engaging in elections generally. And I just want to validate that and say that I share that concern. This build and fight, engaging in elections, we're not going to win the revolution by engaging politically, right? There's no silver bullets here. But we can make big change, and more importantly, we can shine a light on the deficiencies, the limitations of what we can do electorally. The capitalist class does a great job of sort of confining our imagination to what can be done through elections. They say, "Oh, you want this policy? You want people in this country to be fed and housed? Well, your opportunity to advocate that is at the ballot box. And oh no, your candidate didn't win, or the ballot initiative was unsuccessful, and therefore, that's it. I'm sorry. This is the system that we have, and so you can't have those things." And unfortunately, a lot of us have sort of been propagandized into believing that. It's oh, bummer. We tried, we fought, and we lost, and so I guess we just need to go home. And pointing out that is an unacceptable result is one of my primary motivators. I want to be able to say, shout loud and clear, Like, no, we're going to house and feed people. And if you make that illegal, then the law is the problem, right? Like, I am not an electoral fetishist. I'm not a legal fetishist. We need to start questioning, chipping away, dismantling this sort of superstructure, the components of the superstructure of the law and politics that undergird this, this unjust system that we live in. And, like, voting isn't going to get us all the way there, but we're going to expand that funnel. We're going to draw people in. We're going to get people excited about how we go further. And shine the light on the inadequacies of how folks think about politics in this country. So I just wanted to make very clear that though we are engaging in elections, we are doing so from an explicitly transformative perspective. And just wanted to
I love that
make
perspective.
that clear.
And if it says anything, I'll fight in the trenches with you any day. People think like you do. We need more soldiers like that in this struggle. This will wrap up this edition of Rednecks Gone Green. My name is Rob Robinson. I want to thank our guest today, Johanna Epke. I just want to share, obviously, I'm not a redneck. I live in New York. I haven't gone green, but your regular co-host will be back for the next episode. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.